In this chapter we'll be learning about all the different kinds of lights, and then in the next chapter we'll be opening up a pre-made scene to light and render. Let's start by learning the different types of lights. Open up the blend file, lighting.blend, from the project/blends folder. Now I didn't really change anything to the default scene except I added a floor and a couple more boxes. Let's press F12 and see what we've got so far. So it basically looks like the 3D view, except with shadows. Also make sure to enable GLSL from the right side toolbar under the shading options so that we can preview things better in the 3D view. Let's get rid of that. Now this is just the default lamp lighting the whole scene, nothing special. Let's rotate the view to get out of camera view and select that lamp up in the sky there. Now let's go to the lamp buttons, which is this sun icon here. And you'll see that the type of lamp this is a point lamp, enabled right here. That basically means it's like a light bulb. It will emit light in all directions. So here you can change the type of lamp that this is, and underneath that you can change the color of the lamp. And underneath that is the energy value, which is how bright or dim the light is. Down here is the fall off distance. Now this determines how far the light will shine at full brightness. I'm going to leave that at 25. Beneath that is an option called Sphere. If you enable Sphere and you zoom out, you'll see a bounding sphere around the lamp that's based on the fall-off distance. Any objects beyond the fall-off distance and this sphere will not be illuminated at all now. So if you change the distance, you'll see the size of this sphere change too. So these two cubes over here are outside of the sphere distance, so press Alt and Z and let's see if they're illuminated. Nope, nothing's illuminated because they're all outside that bounding sphere. Change the distance and you'll see everything starts to become illuminated now. So I'm going to leave distance at 25 and sphere disabled. Now these side options here, the top one, negative, allows you to make this a negative light, which will subtract light from the scene instead of add to it. And you can also enable this layer only, and this lamp will only illuminate objects that are in the same layer as it. You can also turn off specular if you don't want this light to affect specularity, and the same thing with diffuse. If you turn off diffuse and leave specular on, then this lamp will only affect specularity, so you can do things like add a little bit of extra shine to your objects without lighting them anymore. In the shadow panel down here, make sure ray shadow is enabled, but we can also click on no shadow to turn off shadows altogether. So with ray shadow enabled, we can change the color of the shadows here. We can also enable only shadow, which means this light will no longer illuminate any objects in the scene. It will only cast extra shadows. Under the sampling options down here, we can define how soft the shadow is and how quickly it spreads the further from the object it's casted. So if we increase soft size to 2 and press F12 to render, let's see what happens. Well, nothing happens. Why is that? That's because we need to increase the samples. So let's increase the samples to 10. It'll take a little longer. The blurry shadows are definitely worth it. So let's press F12 again and see what it looks like. There we go. You can see the shadows start to get blurry the further from the object it is. So the higher the samples, the better the quality, but the longer the render time as well. Now let's change the lamp type to a sunlight. So with the lamp selected, change it to sun and rotate it to point at the cubes. You'll see we get a nice preview of the shadows using sunlights. Sun lamps cast light in one direction, defined by how the lamp is rotated. Now over here in the lamp options, you'll see at the top we have basically all the same options, and they all do the same things. And if you scroll down to the shadows panel, you'll see all the same options here as well. But this middle panel here is new. It's for sky and atmosphere. If you enable these options here, you can actually create a sky and an atmosphere. It will change the sky color, light color, and the atmosphere based on the settings you choose. I'm not going to go into detail with this stuff, but you can experiment and figure things out on your own pretty easily. Basically, the sky section simulates a sky and a sun. Let's enable that, and you can see here in the preview what I mean. And the atmosphere section basically adds some ambient lighting to the scene. Again, you can play around with that and experiment. It's actually fun to use, and there's even some presets here for different kinds of skies. So desert sky looks something like that. Mountain sky, classic, whatever. Now let's change the lamp type to a spotlight. It's exactly what the name suggests too. At the top here, we have all the same options that we had before. Down here we have a new panel called Spot Shape, where we can change the shape of the spotlight cone. We can increase the size or decrease it to make it tighter, and we can change the blend factor to determine how much the light fades as it reaches the edge of the spotlight. I'm going to move this into position so that it lights the whole scene better. Just like that. And let's enable ray trace shadows under the shadow panel. We've worked with them before, so we know what they look like. But there's also a new option here called buffer shadow, and we'll be working with that next. But let's see what we've got so far. Let's press F12 to render it. So that's what our spotlight looks like with some ray trace shadows. In the spot shape panel, there's also another option called halo, which basically simulates volumetric lighting. Press F12, let's see what it looks like. So it's like you're shining light into a dusty room. Now we can create some rays of light being cast from these cubes, but we can't do that with ray trace shadows. We can only do that with buffer shadows. So for now, let's disable halo, and we'll come back to that. Now let's enable buffer shadows. But the big benefit to them is that they render much faster, but they're not going to be as good as ray trace shadows. But for a lot of different jobs, it might do the trick. After enabling buffer shadow, you'll notice all these new options here. Under buffer type, there's 4 different types of buffer shadows to choose from. Let's start with the classical. The soft value here determines how blurry or how soft the shadows are. And the 3 sample fields over here define the quality of the shadow. Right now, they're actually set pretty low, so we're going to get some pretty crappy shadows. 2 very important fields for buffer shadows are the clip start value and the clip end value. This is the range where shadows are casted. Anything outside of this range will not cast shadows. Let's press F12 and see what we got so far. So you'll notice 2 things right off the bat. 1, I was right, the shadows are crappy. You can tell around the edges here. But 2, the shadows don't quite seem to be reaching the objects they're being casted from. That's a weird issue. And you can see in the 3D preview here, or in the 3D view, that problem exists in the 3D view as well. The thing about buffer shadows is that it's very picky about where the clip start value is. The clip start value, which is the top of this orange line right here, should be a lot closer to the subject matter that you're having cast shadows. So let's increase the clip start so that it's closer to these boxes. And you'll see that fixes the problem in the 3D view. The shadows are now connected to the objects they're being casted from. Let's press F12 and see how it looks in a render. Alright, good. That seemed to solve the problem. You can also adjust the bias value here to solve that issue. So, for example, if we put the clip start back to 0.5 and adjust the bias value by decreasing that, it starts to get closer to the boxes that are casting the shadows. But if you decrease the bias value too low, you get actually a pretty interesting effect, but obviously not quite desired. So I'm going to leave bias at 0.5 and increase the clip start to be closer to those boxes. Let's F12 and let's just make sure what we got looks good. Yep, that's fine. Now let's increase the quality of the shadows. Let's change sample buffers to 4. Let's change size to 20, 48, and samples, I don't know, 10. I'm just increasing them all Let's press F12 and hope we got something good. Alright, that looks a lot better. But of course, increasing samples will slow down the render a little bit, but they're still going to be a little bit faster than ray trace shadows. Alright, so when you're using buffer shadows, always be mindful of where that clip start is. If your shadows are weird, it's probably because of the clip start. And if they're cut off, it's probably because of the clip end. Now let's go over the other different types of buffer shadows. Classic halfway is just, it's similar to classical, but it's less picky about where that clip start is. Irregular doesn't allow you to add softness to your shadows. It's going to give you a perfectly sharp shadow. So let's press F12. You'll see what I mean. It's perfectly sharp. It's a very good shadow though, but you can't blur it any. And deep shadow is probably the best of the bunch, but it does take a tad bit longer to render. One last thing I want to point out about quality of shadows is the filter type over here. In this menu I have 3 different filters to choose from for the buffer shadows. Box is default, but it's probably the worst of the bunch. I would go with either tint or gauze for more high resolution renders. They'll give you a better shadow. Now let me show you how to add those rays of light I was talking about earlier. So let's enable halo again. And just for the heck of it, press F12 to render, and nothing pops up. It's because I have the buffer type set to deep. Halo really only works best with classical or classic halfway. So let's choose classic halfway and re-render, see what it looks like. Alright, so we have something that we've seen before. It just looks like a light shining into a room full of dust. But it's not creating any volumetric shadows being cast from these 4 boxes. Just for right now, I'm going to select all 4 of these boxes and move them to a hidden layer. So I'm going to move them to the second layer. And now I'm going to create a sphere in the center there. I'm going to move that up so that it's floating. And then I'm going to select the lamp, press Alt and R to undo its rotation, and move that above the sphere so that it's pointing right down on it. And then I'm going to change the size of the spotlight cone so that it kind of fits around the sphere just like that. And I'm going to go back into camera view. I'm going to select the camera here by selecting the rim of the camera view. I'm going to move it up so the sphere is centered. Just like that. And zoom out a little bit so I can catch the shadow on the floor. Alright, now our scene's set up. I have the spotlight looking straight down on this sphere. So select the spotlight again. And halo is already enabled. Intensity is at 1. Let's increase the steps. This is what creates that volumetric shadow. The maximum is 12, so let's put it at about 8. Press F12 and see what happens. And boom. So you can see how that works. The spotlight is casting this cone of volumetric light, and any obstacles in the light are casting these volumetric shadows. And this is a really cool effect and used in lots of things like logo animations, where light is shining through all the letters of a logo. Let's close that, and that pretty much does it for all the options for a spotlight. I'm going to press Ctrl and Z to undo everything we just did and get our cubes back into the scene. Alright. Now let's change the lamp type to Hemi. So select the lamp, go to the light buttons, and click on Hemi. Hemi is similar to a sun lamp in that it's generally pointing in one direction, and you can change that direction by rotating the light. But a Hemi light is much, much softer. You can see it kind of floods the whole scene with lighting. Even the backside of these boxes, which isn't receiving direct light, is getting some illumination from a Hemi light. Now with Hemi lights you can't add shadows. This is only for extra illumination, but it is very useful for adding some extra soft lighting to your scene. Let's press F12 and see what that looks like. It doesn't look that great, I'll be honest with you, but trust me when I say that if your scene needs a little bit of extra soft lighting, a Hemi light will come to the rescue. Now let's change the lamp type from Hemi to area light. You'll see right away the scene turns black. That's not because the scene's not being illuminated. It's because we can't preview area lamp lighting in the 3D view, not even with GLSL enabled. So area lights are areas of light, either square or rectangular, and they emit light based on their shape and their size. So here we have a little square light that's going to be illuminating the scene. The whole area of this square is going to be shooting light at our boxes, not just this little point in the center. So that's what makes area lights unique. We can make this a huge pane of light shining down on these boxes, and it's going to change the way the shadows look, and it's going to change the way it illuminates them. But let's keep it at that regular size for right now. And let's render this, see what it looks like so far. And it doesn't look good. It's too bright and there's no shadows. So first things first, let's enable ray shadows over here. And then let's decrease the energy down real low to 0.1. Let's re-render and see if we got something half decent. Well, it's still a little bright, but it's a lot better. You'll notice there's no options for softening the shadows. Area lights do that automatically depending on the distance the light is from the objects. The closer the light is to the objects, the more scattered the shadow will be, and the further the light is from the objects, the sharper the shadows will be. You can change the samples, though, in the sampling options here, to increase the quality of the shadow. You'll see at just 10 samples, there is a bit of noise going on where the shadow starts to blur. The cool thing about area lights is how it handles shadows. I'm going to reposition this behind the boxes real quick. Press Alt-R to clear that rotation. Move it behind the boxes and aim it at them. And let me render this real quick to see what it looks like. So here we have an average size area light lighting this scene and casting some pretty normal shadows. And it's a relatively small area light. So you can see that it's not as wide as this scene is. So it's not going to be illuminating the left side of this box or the right sides of these boxes. But let me scale that up so that it's bigger. So now the light should be emitting from the side of the area light over here, and it should be illuminating the sides of all the boxes. Let's press F12 and see if that happened. Yep, you'll see the sides of the boxes are being illuminated now because we have a giant pane of light enveloping all the objects in this scene. And it's also changing the way the shadows are casted. Because light is being emitted from such a large pane, it is coming from lots of different directions. And that's what's creating these very short and tapered off shadows. So that's the cool thing about area lights. You can scale them up really big, or you can scale them down really small. You can make this a rectangle, and it's going to emit light in that shape. And we can change the size of that rectangle with these here, or we can even scale it and stretch it in the 3D view. And I really like area lights, just because I really like shadows, and this has a cool way of handling shadows. Now let's do something fun. One cool thing about lamps is that we can use textures with them. So let's delete this light, and in top view, press Shift and A and add a new spotlight. Let's move this off to the side, and in front view, move it up and rotate it to look at our boxes. Let's see how that looks. Now let's enable ray shadow, because I'm sick of dealing with that buffer shadow crap. And what we're going to do now is make it look like this light is shining through a window, and that window is going to be casting a shadow onto these boxes. So go to the texture buttons now, which is the checkerboard icon, and make sure the lamp option is enabled, and click on New. And in the preview panel here, enable both so that we can see our texture on the left and the texture applied to the light on the right. So you'll see it adds all of these pink clouds. The clouds are pink because the color at the bottom is pink. Press render real quick, Let's see what that looks like. It looks exactly what we thought it would look like. Pink clouds being cast onto the scene by the light. But you get the idea. You can see how easy it is now to add a texture to a light. So now let's change the texture type from clouds to image. And press the open button in the image panel and navigate textures folder and select light. Pretty cool, huh? You can see in the 3D view you get a good preview of how that texture looks shining through the spotlight. So you'll see the shadow of our image map being cast onto these boxes like the light shining through a window. And this is our texture over here. It's just a little representation of a window. 4 white squares with black lines through them. Well, that looks really cool. Press F12. Let's see how that looks rendered. And crap. It's repeating the texture like a million times, but that's an easy fix. All we have to do to fix that is scroll down to the mapping panel and change the coordinates from global to view. That way the texture is going to stretch to the view of the spotlight. Press F12 again, and now it's perfect. And that pretty much does it for lighting.